Welcome everyone to part 8 of module 7, motivation, emotion, and personality. Today what we're going to be looking at is the link between health and happiness. So last time I talked to you, we were looking at how stress affects happiness and stress affects health. Now we're going to look at kind of the flip side and look about a little bit more at the opposite, where we're talking about how does health and happiness, how are they connected to one another. So the first thing we can talk about is optimism in general, just having a generally positive outlook. That's all we're really referring to when we talk about optimism in this class. So we have seen links between being more optimistic or having a more positive outlook and a whole bunch of different things in your life and in your health. So for example, it has been shown to decrease fatigue and stress, increase health, respond better to stress, and increase the length of life. So having an optimistic look or just outlook in general, having a more positive view of the world and of life and what's happening tends to have better or lead to better health outcomes, as well as obviously outcomes as far as your overall, happiness emotionally goes as well. We can also see really important factors in social supports. So we know that feeling liked and encouraged by intimate friends and family promotes both health and happiness. So having people that are strong social supports, whether those are friendships or family members, but people that are there to support us and care for us and encourage us and kind of do all these other different things, help us not only be physically healthier, but obviously happier as well. Some of the specific examples we see is that people are less likely to die early than if they are socially isolated. Again, if they have a strong social support. Marital quality predicts health to about the same extent as healthy diet and physical activity does. So again, they can look at groups of people. They can basically look at marital quality, and it will tell them pretty much as accurately as if they look at someone's health and how physically active they are. It can pretty much as accurately predict their health later on in life. So again, a very big factor here. And then support calms us and reduces blood pressure and stress hormones. So as well as having these kind of long-term, more longitudinal study kind of things where we're seeing outcomes later on, we can also look at specific physiological and biological reactions and see how this support can help us actually reduce specific biological things and specific physiological things like blood pressure and like stress hormones, and actually get rid of them or lower them. So what are some ways that we can actually reduce stress? We're going to just talk about a few kind of big ones, or two really main ones. Our first one is actually aerobic exercise. So aerobic exercise is sustained oxygen consuming exertion like jogging, swimming, biking. Weightlifting is what was be considered anaerobic, which is without oxygen. With aerobic exercise, we're talking about with oxygen. So it's something where you are breathing. It tends to be long, kind of extended working out or extended exercise. And again, there's a lot of really great outcomes that we have with this, obviously with health, but also with psychology. So we see that exercise adds about 7 hours to your life per hour of working out. So again, this is something that we would see with longitudinal studies where we can look at how much someone works out or tends to work out during their lifetime, and then how long they live, and then we can find patterns within that. We see that aerobic exercise increases quality of life by giving more energy, better mood, and stronger relationships. So working out improves all of these different pieces. It also decreases the likelihood of cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and strokes. And then lastly, it prevents or reduces depression and anxiety. So this is actually a study they did where they had a bunch of, I believe they were college students that were suffering from different levels of depression and anxiety. And then they had 3 different groups and they followed them. So one group was basically just not doing anything different. They were just following a normal routine. One group was required to work out for, I think it was like an hour a day. And one group was doing, I believe, meditation. And what they found was that the group that was exercising had the kind of biggest preventatives and the biggest reduction in depression and anxiety. So it had the kind of the best outcomes for them. We did see kind of a what's the word I want to use? We did see people who were using like meditation also improve. It just wasn't to the same level that we saw with aerobic exercise. That also gets us to looking at meditation and relaxation, as well as faith communities. So relaxation and meditation, and again, there's a million different ways you can do this. There isn't necessarily one right way or wrong way. It's more about just the practice in general. So we know that relaxation techniques can help alleviate headaches, hypertension, anxiety, and insomnia, as well as improve concentration, decision making, and relationships. So going through and meditating or relaxing in different ways actually helps, again, obviously with physical health issues, as well as just kind of more cognitive processes like concentration and decision making. We do also see a tie of between faith communities and health as well. So people who have strong ties to a religious community tend to also live longer than people that don't. Now, what's important about this is the big correlation here is really has to probably do with the kind of bonds that they're creating, right? When we look at faith communities, it doesn't really matter what the community is, what kind of faith it is. It's the fact that you're in this strong social ties, right? And it kind of comes back to what we talked about earlier. Why can't I go backwards? There we go. With social support, right? If I am a part of any sort of religious group or any faith group, I have built-in supports that I may not have if I'm not part of one of those groups. So we can see that also improve life, and that will tends to extend it as well. Next, we're going to start looking a little bit at happiness. So one of the things that we've actually seen, and something that you guys have actually been kind of studying a little bit with your Pay It Forward assignment, is the feel good, do good phenomenon. So the feel good, do good phenomenon is basically the tendency that people have to be more helpful when they're in a good mood. So if you feel good, if you're in a good mood for a certain day for whatever reason, you're more likely to be helpful. You're more likely to do things to go out of your way for people. And one of the things that's kind of important about this is it's also kind of cyclical. So we've also seen, and this is what the Pay It Forward activity is really all about, is that when people do good deeds, when they go out and they do something that's good, it makes them feel happier. And so one of the things we can see with this is kind of this cyclical, this cycle that we see with how this will work, right? Where I do something good for someone, it makes me feel good. Because I feel good, it makes me more likely to do something for somebody again, which will make me feel good, and it kind of will continue on and on and on. So that's the feel good, do good phenomenon. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what is called positive psychology. Now we don't talk about positive psychology a lot. I kind of think of it as a little bit kind of like the self-help style or idea of psychology. Now, what positive psychology is, and I'm just going to give you the actual definition, is the scientific study of human flourishing with the goals of discovering and promoting strengths and virtues that help individuals and communities thrive. So a pretty long definition. The big thing here is it's all about human growth. It's all about improving human life. It's very much a part, like within the humanistic perspective, they would kind of envelope positive psychology. So positive psychologists would be looking at, how do I help people set goals? How do I help people achieve things? How do I build communities that are better for the people within them? All of those things would be kind of within positive psychology. One thing we see is what is called subjective well-being. Now, subjective well-being is very important. It's basically your self-perceived happiness or satisfaction with life. Now, one thing that's important is that it is subjective. And we're going to kind of see how this works in just a second on the next slide. But well-being is a subjective experience, which means that for everyone needs different things to feel happy or to be satisfied with their life. And a lot of it has to do with how you perceive what's going on or what your life is like or what's happening to you and all these other kind of things. So well-being tends to be very much a subjective measure when we look at it. One way we can see that is actually through what is called the adaptation level phenomenon. I'm just going to try and get myself out of the way here. Okay. Adaptation level phenomenon and relative deprivation. So adaptation level phenomenon is our tendency to form judgments relative to a neutral level defined by our prior experiences. So this is basically what that means. We have an idea of what it means to be like at a neutral level. Things aren't necessarily good, things aren't necessarily bad. You're right in the middle. Now, the way that this level is set, though, is based on our past experiences. So if we've had a maybe very positive, very happy, very easygoing life, that level that we set is going to be different than someone who maybe had a much tougher life, who had to struggle a lot harder for things, who maybe had more unhappy kind of moments or more unhappy chunks of time in their life. So we kind of set this level based on what we know and what we experience. And again, we form our judgments based on these experiences, right? So we have this idea of what we think is good or acceptable, but it's based on what we know, okay? In addition, we have what is called relative deprivation. So relative deprivation is the perception that one is worse off relative to those with whom one compares oneself. So this is a simple way to think about this, is that when you think about, if I asked you if you have a good life or not, what you're going to do is you're going to think about, or I should say it this way. When I ask you how good is your life, what you're going to do is you're going to compare yourself to other people. You're going to look around at people that you consider your peers, and you're going to compare yourself. So a simple example of this is if I asked you, whether or not you felt like your family is wealthy, what you'll do, like if I said wealthy or middle class or lower class or something like that, what you would do is you would look around at the people around you. So you'd look at your close friends, you would look at people that you're in clubs or groups or teams together with, you would look at your neighbors, and you would compare yourself to them. Right? That's how you would determine where you are. Okay? And again, we look at that to kind of perceive where we are. Now, generally, when we're talking about relative deprivation, this is referring to our tendency to compare ourselves to people that are slightly better off than us. So when if I asked you, how well your family is doing financially, right? Generally speaking, you're going to compare yourself to someone who's doing a little bit better than you, right? And because of that, you feel like there's a little bit of a deprivation there, right? You might have a lot of things, but we don't have as much as they have. That's this idea of relative deprivation. We feel like we're a little bit worse off than others that we compare ourselves to. Now, again, we can all of this is really about looking at this idea of how happiness is subjective and well-being is subjective. So we can actually talk about it a little bit more, and there's a good example here on the screen up here, this graph. So this is actually showing adaptation level phenomenon. So what this blue line is showing us personal income. So how much money people make. It's all been adjusted to be the amount of money from 1995. So this is adjusted, to deal with inflation and all that kind of stuff. But this is the personal income that people have. Now notice the personal income level is going up, pretty much straight up continuously, right? It's a pretty straight line here. So it's increasing again and again and again every single year. Now this other line, this red line, is showing the percentage of people, and you can see the percentages over here, that are very happy, okay, every year. Now, what we would expect is that as people get more and more money, they would feel happier and happier, right? Because obviously, not that money makes people happy directly, but if you're not worried about paying bills, if you're able to afford to do different things or buy things, right? Those are all things that are going to, generally speaking, make your life better. So we would expect that as income rises, they would feel better. But what we see is that even as income continues to go up, happiness basically hasn't changed at all. It stayed at the exact same level, which is about 30% of people say that they are very happy, describing themselves as very happy. Now, again, the idea is that this happens, at least partially, because of this adaptation level phenomenon, because of relative deprivation, right? So even though in, let's say, 1980, right, people are making, I don't know, let's say, like, I'm just going to move down to make it easy numbers. Where am I? 1980 was what, about 15,000? They're making about 5,000 more dollars than people were 15 years before that. They don't compare themselves to that same group, right? When I ask you guys how happy you are, you don't think about, well, my grandparents didn't have running water and they didn't have electricity or something like that, right? You don't think about those things. You don't think about, well, they didn't even have smartphones 20 years ago, so it's actually really good. You compare yourselves to people that you consider yourself a peer with. So you look at other people and you go, yeah, it's all right, but this other person has this nicer thing, or a nicer car, the nicer phone, or better clothes, or a bigger house, or whatever. So what we see is that because of this, these even these improvements, and again, we would say that this is an improvement in life, doesn't actually affect people's happiness, right? It doesn't actually make a noticeable change, at least as a whole, right, in how people are feeling and how happy people are. So because of this constant kind of shifting, because of it's subjective, there's a lot of kind of intricacies that are playing a part in why people feel really happy or why they maybe don't. That's going to get us to the end of this section, which is, again, health and happiness. Please take a few moments and do a quick summary, and I'll see you guys next time.